2024 was a pretty awful year in the fight against climate change. Companies who made big promises about net zero just a few years ago quietly scrapped them in the face of rising costs. The Red Sea crisis led to skyrocketing emissions from ships taking the long way around Africa. Green hydrogen projects collapsed around the world because of rising costs and lack of demand. Under President Donald Trump, meanwhile, America has switched from splurging on green tech to talk of buying Greenland and invading Panama. This year, however, could see some progress from the unlikeliest of places: shipping's global regulator, the International Maritime Organization. Welcome to the Lloyd's List podcast. I'm Declan Bush, and I cover sustainability for Lloyd's List. Monday, February 17, kicks off the first of a crucial series of climate talks at the IMO. There are just 2 intersessional working group meetings and 1 Marine Environment Protection Committee left to approve regulations to bring shipping to net zero by or around 2050. Hundreds of negotiators will be working day and night to agree on some combination of a carbon price tool and a greenhouse gas fuel standard. The rules have to close the price gap between fossil and green fuels, kickstart investments in renewable supply chains, and also help poorer countries and low-lying island states cope with the costs of climate change. Yes, we've been banging on about this for many years now, but 2025 is different. The IMO's 2023 GHG strategy requires it to approve its midterm measures in April and adopt them in October to then come into force by about 2027.
I think if we take this as a year in its whole, I think the next 2 months are going to be absolutely critical for our industry.
Guy Platten is Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping. He told me his predictions on Friday.
We always say that sort of thing, but I think genuinely now there's potentially game-changing stuff being discussed in terms of the midterm measures and changes to conventions, which will be agreed in the autumn. So we know there's a lot, the stakes are very, very high. I think how much progress will be seen to happen next week, well, let's see. But I think there'll be an awful lot going on in the background as well. So, there's a succession of meetings now. We've got the intersessional working group on GHG reduction next week. And we've got another meeting in the beginning of April. Then we have the main MEPC. So there's and then there's a time in between as well. So I think we need to look at it as a whole. But it really is well now starting to get to the negotiations.
So what can we expect? ISW GHG is not open to the press, but it's where much of the real political horse trading takes place. The IMO's 176 member states are split roughly between those in favour of a carbon levy per tonne of CO2 equivalent, combined with a green fuel standard, and those who only want a fuel standard alone. A group of around 50 countries and NGOs have combined their proposals for a levy, though they haven't agreed what the CO2 price should be. It could be as low as $18.75 or as high as $150. On the other side is a smaller but powerful group of countries including China, Brazil, Argentina and Norway, who would rather the IMO adopted a fuel standard alone with a kind of credit trading mechanism and more wiggle room to help ships comply. Jesse Farnstock is Decarbonisation Director at the Global Maritime Forum. He argues that a fuel standard alone won't be enough to start a real fuel transition.
The levy is really the key tool for raising revenue. And that's a big part of the story. But one of the other strengths of the levy is that it can be applied globally to all emissions, and that allows it to set a stable, universal incentive that basically disadvantages fossil fuels everywhere they're deployed, and that is an important input to the business case just as an incentive. So quite apart from the revenue that it can raise, it's an important input to investors' business cases. Compared to the other option for an economic element that's being discussed in the negotiations right now, the discussions around a credit trading mechanism, that would be less likely to provide a stable incentive. It's more affected by market forces like the price of alternatives, the overall demand for the credits. And it's less bankable for investors, especially investors in fuel production, which is really the key. We need to get these new fuels, get the production side, the supply chain developed as quickly as possible if we're going to avoid having bottlenecks and stranded assets in the future.
We've got a few competing numbers for a levy on the table. Do you have a favourite number for what that levy should be or how much it should cost per tonne of carbon?
Well, we're not going out and taking a position as GMF. Obviously, that's not really something we do. And as you say, there's this sort of range of proposals on the table. First, I think it's important to say that the breadth of support for the levy is really encouraging. The recent submission from countries in support of the levy was represent about 70% of global tonnage, shows that countries recognize the central role that a levy can play, both in creating an incentive and generating revenue. But what the absolute level should be, I mean, a higher levy sends a stronger signal, and it also raises more revenue. So I think at the upper end of the ranges that are being discussed right now, you'll see a stronger input to business cases for industry. It will do more to spur investments, particularly in the new fuels like ammonia and methanol, where those investments are riskier and costs are higher, or the higher levy will send a stronger signal.
Jesse is among those arguing that real decarbonisation will have to be managed in order to work. That means including not just sticks for dirty fuels, but carrots for the right sort of fuels as well. The worry is that setting a carbon price too low sets off a rush for biofuels and LNG, the only drop-in fuel options available today. Most experts say there won't be nearly enough biofuel to meet shipping's needs in the years ahead, and the jury is still out on LNG's green benefits. The holy grail is green e-fuels. These are made by combining green hydrogen from renewable electricity to make ammonia, methanol, or methane. These are by far the most expensive option, but researchers say they are the only scalable one. Jesse told me the rules should include targeted rewards for e-fuels so that investors get the confidence they need to start building related supply and bunkering infrastructure in time.
The best analysis shows that achieving truly zero emission shipping on around by around 2050 means a portfolio of fuels that includes high volumes of hydrogen-based e-fuels, right? And to the extent that the measures rely on fuel neutral mechanisms, like, for example, a global fuel standard with credit trading, it's unlikely that the incentives to invest in those e-fuels will materialize soon enough, right? It's likely to incentivize the sort of marginal options, which, as you say, could include LNG, but also biofuels, both gaseous and liquid biofuels. And that's why we think that a fixed levy as a stable incentive outside of the credit trading system that gives investors more long-term stability, but also the targeted rewards are very critical. And we've done a lot of work with the industry on looking at the business cases for using e-fuels, and it's really clear that those rewards are going to be necessary if we're going to stimulate these value chains.
Details aside, it would have been just about unthinkable only a few years ago for the shipping industry to support a universal carbon levy. But that's where we find ourselves. Getting 50 countries to back the idea is a huge diplomatic achievement by IMO standards. But will it be enough when the likes of China and the United States oppose it? Guy Platten is confident that compromises can be reached.
Arsenio Dominguez, just Secretary General, and he's urging countries to concentrate on identifying areas for compromise to facilitate this transition. I think his words really resonate with me strongly as well. So it's about, what people say in public and what you can do behind the scenes. We'll see what the art of the possible is. But I think we've all got to come in with a positive mindset and not it's our deal or no deal. And hopefully every country will come into that thing, because the stakes are really high for the global industry.
With so much still left to agree on and so little time to agree it, when will we know the result? The IMO will be keen to approve something to stay on track in April, but sources think the real headline detail may not come out until the extraordinary MEPC session as late as October. Jesse Funstock cautions against hoping for a miracle.
I think that it's probably reasonable to expect that MEPC 83 and the process leading up to it will look a fair amount like MEPC 80 and the process leading up to it did. That is to say that agreement will come really close to the last minute. That doesn't mean that the discussions that happen next week aren't important. Those discussions are going to be building, obviously, on the submissions that have been made in the run-up to ISWG. And I think that there are a lot of important points being put on the table. I referred earlier in our conversation to the submission showing really broad support for the levy, and I think that that's a big step forward. I think that there are signs of some increasing consensus around a couple of different elements that are positive, but I don't think we're likely to see a major breakthrough communicated publicly after this meeting. Hopefully there is meaningful progress made in terms of accepting what the core elements are. But I think maybe even beyond that, it's important to recognize that even at MEPC 83, there's a chance that important elements remain undefined, that they are left to be handled in the guidance rather than in the annex, so to speak, without getting into too much of the procedural details. And I think that's a reality we probably need to be prepared for.
A global carbon price on shipping of any kind could be the first agreed worldwide for any industry. It could really change the world. But that involves questions far harder than those the IMO is used to dealing with. A carbon levy would raise billions of dollars a year. Who should collect that money? What should it be spent on? And how can the IMO offset the economic hit to countries worried about, say, inflation and food security? What is, while we're at it, a truly green fuel? The IMO has to work on all of these questions pretty much in parallel, and they all have big implications for the future of shipping. Guy Platten says the IMO has the information it needs, and now it's up to member states to deliver.
I think it's going to be difficult. Was the expression "nothing's decided till everything's decided"? I think is probably true. Is here as it anywhere else, but clearly, firm proposals have gone through. We've introduced regulatory text. We said how this could work with MARPOL. We've done all of that sort of work. So it's about now those discussions, those negotiations, how we can find a way through all of this. But the IMO signed off on this new GHG strategy to be net zero on or around middle of the century. So we've all got to work to that, and with some really key markers on the way. So how does that work in reality? So I do think with goodwill on all sides, we can, I think, be globally leading in terms of industries, in terms of actually moving this whole agenda forward. So, and it's a bit like we did perhaps on our labour force. We're the only global industry with a Maritime Labour Convention, which regulates our workforce. Will we also be in terms of the environmental side of it as well? So let's see now the next few weeks and months, and I really hope that we can get somewhere, and that in the autumn we have the special meeting that these things can be adopted.
It's important to note that the 2023 strategy isn't legally binding. So what happens if the IMO fails to agree or comes up with something too late?
Maybe I'd like to break that down, and I'd break it down by saying I do believe the IMO is going to reach an agreement that's meaningful, right? And I think that the central piece of the global fuel standard is likely to be included in that in a way that that the industry can understand, and in a way that can be, broadly speaking, aligned with the emissions goals set out in the revised greenhouse gas strategy. So I'm quite optimistic that a meaningful agreement will be reached. The kinds of failures that we do see as possible, things that might be quite problematic, relate to the things we discussed earlier. So are there going to be measures included in this basket that really do the utmost to promote an early transition to e-fuels, to stimulate those value chains that are going to be needed, and avoid the risk of locking in alternatives and having to move suddenly to more scalable alternatives later in the transition? That's why we're really emphasizing the levy and the targeted rewards. On the flip side, is this agreement going to be robust on the terms of the strategy with respect to a just and equitable transition, right? Getting an agreement that's politically sustainable means ensuring that this isn't a transition that's purely for the developed world, or where the inequalities that exist between economies and even between how shipping serves economies are exacerbated by these measures. We really think that that's a place where failure could have consequences, not just the human consequences, which are extremely important, by potentially making some countries poorer, harming economies in the developing world, but also political consequences, making the agreement less stable and sustainable going forward. We really think it's important that this is designed in a way so that the countries that are most impacted by potential rising trade costs, for example, or have the greatest need for support in investing in the transition themselves, have access to resources that are generated in the transition. So that's why we've been really, arguing the levy is by far the best solution. All transitions will raise costs. The levy can generate the revenues that can help offset those costs.
IMO negotiators are under huge pressure to deliver these regulations on time. Negotiators will look for agreement on the outline and hope to fill in the harder details later. But unfortunately, that leaves many, if not most, of the biggest questions until the last minute. It is now up to governments to come up with something that works.
Our message to the negotiators is that industry hates uncertainty more than almost anything, and so the more clarity about eventual tough decisions that are going to need to be taken that can be provided early, the better. On the flip side of that, I think we also have a message to the industry that certainty in policy is forever elusive, and all of the best assessments of what is needed from this transition, what the shape of the transition is going to need to look like, what kinds of investments in fuels and technologies are going to be needed, are really out there already. And that industry needs to be prepared, even if there's uncertainty lingering in the policies, to invest on the basis of the strategy that's already accepted and approved. The policies will eventually catch up to the strategy. That's our belief. We may not get the exact clarity that we want in April, but we do believe that they will eventually get there.
Let's hope they do. That's all we've got time for this week. You can read more Lloyd's List analysis on the IMO on our website or reach out to me at declan.bush@lloydslistintelligence.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with you next week with more of the stories shaping shipping. Goodbye.